Welcome to DABCC Radio,
where smart people listen.
Virtualization and Cloud Talk,
Featuring cutting-edge solutions from the hottest companies around the globe.
broadcasting from the DABCC offices in sunny Sarasota, Florida.
Surrounded by computers, books, and Legos.
A Microsoft MVP, Citrix Charter CTP, VMware vEXPERT.
And your host, Douglas Brown.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of DABCC Radio. We're back. I must confess, I took a bit of time away. I took a lot of time away, and I also must confess I probably got a little bit burned out doing this. You know, I've been doing DABCC.com it'll be 21 years in January. That's a long time, guys. In the podcast show, 11, 12 years, something like that, and that's also a long time to be doing something over and over and over and over, and so I sort of lost that passion, but I found another passion. That's my job at Agile, and I've had so much fun at Agile that I decided, let's take a little bit of time away from DABCC and sort of recharge those batteries, get that passion back. And at the same time, I was having so much fun at Agile. My job is to run the Agile community and work with our customers and partners and the techie side of the business, right? And I'm a techie by nature, but by training, by desire, by passion. And to have that joy to work with those guys, well, that used up all my time and more. In fact, I wish I had two days in each day just so I could do more and more and more, because it is such a fun job and it is such a fun life that I have. But I was doing a community event last week in Amsterdam, and Jed Ayers, our CEO at Agile, was there, and he looked at me and said, "What happened to that podcast show? You don't do that anymore." And when the CEO tells you to do something, you do it. But that has no reason why I'm picking this up, to be honest with you. But he woke me up a little bit, and I was like, I do want to do this. I do miss it. And my favorite part about these podcasts is that I get to learn along with you guys. And I've said this many episodes is that my favorite part is I get to learn too. I get to listen. I'm a listener. And smart people listen. That's our tagline at DABCC Radio. Smart people listen. And I get to learn. I get to ask the questions, and I get to learn. So, and then I get to share it with you, and that's what community is all about, is sharing. So, I couldn't be happier to get this back. So please, if you like the show, let me know. It's been really interesting over the past year, taking some time away, and get a lot of emails from you guys saying, "Hey, Doug, what happened to the podcast show? We miss it. We liked it. Please." Keep those emails coming, but tell me you're happy to have it back. My email is dbrown@dabcc.com or brown@igel.com. Either one will work. And if you'd like to be on the show, please interview me, or please let me interview you. Please email me, and we'll set a time and we'll do this. I just couldn't be happy. I hope you hear the passion in my voice. It's back. And today we have an old friend of mine and someone I have a lot of respect for, Jim Moyle, on the line, and he's going to share all this. We're going to talk about WVD, and Jim's over at Microsoft now through the FS Logics acquisition. And I'm really excited about that. Jim's at the mothership, so I want to hear all about what that's like, and his views on WVD, Microsoft's views on WVD. Agile made history, as Jed likes to say, with Microsoft at Ignite, and talk a bit about that and what that means. And I'm just so excited about doing this again. And what do I say? I'll just sort of shut up and let's get to my interview. How's that? Okay. So with no further ado, here's my interview with the amazing, the powerful, the fabulous Jim Moyle. Okay, Jim, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. And, we were chatting. I don't remember. I've seen you a lot lately, and I forget where we're chatting, and you agreed to do this, and it sort of gave me the kick to get this thing going again. So thanks so much for that.
That's all right, Doug. I'm always happy to give you a kick whenever I see you.
There's the Jim I know and love. So I'm very excited. Let's just dive into this. So for those who might not know the lovable Jim, can you tell us who you are, a little bit about you and your past?
Sure thing. So my name is Jim Moyle, and I have been knocking around end-user computing for 20-odd years. I'm a current Citrix Technology Professional. I've held that award for nine years, I think. It's getting on for a while. I founded and I currently help run the UK Citrix user group. I've been knocking around startups for the last 10 years in various roles. And so most recently a company called FS Logics, which then got acquired by Microsoft.
Yeah, so that's, I was a big fan of FS Logics, and we had Kevin on the show a few times, and it was always great to learn about it. Kevin makes great software, right? From T-Scale to FS Logics to I can't wait to see what he does next, right?
Yeah, so Kevin's a serial CEO of software startups, and I think Kevin Goodman's been the most successful CEO that I've ever known, at least in this section of the industry. So it was a real pleasure working for him, real learning experience for me. Having gone through the ringer in a previous life, and had a startup that went not so well, and then having a startup that went brilliantly. It was a great comparison of the two ways of thinking and the ways of doing things. So yeah, I learned a lot.
Yeah. So you end up at Microsoft. So can you talk a bit about, coming to Microsoft? What do you do at Microsoft? Things like that.
Sure thing. So I've got a good title at Microsoft, and this is literally on my contract. So I am a Windows Virtual Desktop Global Black Belt, which is a bit of a mouthful. Yeah. But it's an interesting thing. So what that essentially means is I'm specializing in the new Azure service, Windows Virtual Desktop. And Microsoft puts these teams together that they call Global Black Belt teams as a temporary thing, as they incubate these new technologies. And it's not for every new technology that Microsoft brings out, but just the ones that they think are going to be big. And so they put these teams together for 2 or 3 years to incubate that technology in the marketplace, and they were kind enough to offer me one of those roles.
Very cool, very cool. You're working for the mothership. So, it's one of those things. I had a friend of mine that ended up at Microsoft, and he actually owned a company, and Microsoft acquired them. And I said, "You're going to work there for a while. And are you excited?" He said, "Oh, I can't wait." He goes, "I can't wait to see what the puzzle palace is like from the inside, right? Because everyone knows Microsoft. We've been Microsoft guys. I've been a Microsoft guy since I was a teenager. Even younger than that a little bit, right? But never worked there. And it's such a it's interesting. What's it like to work there?"
So it's fascinating, actually. It's been a sort of weird on-ramp when you're part of an acquisition, because essentially you get given a contract, and the company structure stays the same as it was pre-acquisition, because they don't rip apart the company straight away. It's a very gradual thing over a number of months as, parts of the acquired organization are integrated with the mothership, as you say. So it's been a very gradual process, but now I've completely moved over into this new role. I'm not a contractor anymore. I'm now a full-time employee. But because this is a brand new Azure service, it's still got quite a startup feel about it, right? People are still taking big decisions around the direction of where we want to go, and being able to be involved in those decisions and helping build a brand new Azure service is something, you don't get the chance to do very many times in your life. So I really, really wanted to dive into that and leap into that. And one of the other things that is super nice is how friendly and open to helping you pretty much everybody seems to be in the organization. And the culture, I've worked with a lot of big companies over the years, the big financials. So I was kind of expecting a culture that's maybe a bit similar to that. But what I found was the exact opposite. Very open, very friendly, and I'm really enjoying myself.
That's so cool. You get at the end of the day, you get to sort of say, "Look, I left my mark on Microsoft." That's not something everybody gets to say, right?
Not at all. Not at all. And, it's only a very small part, but seeing, decisions that you're part of making, make it into the product and make it out into an Azure release is very, very satisfying.
And I'd almost argue with you, Jim. WVD, and we'll the next question I want to dive into WVD, but I think it's not going to be a small part of Microsoft, right? Windows is pretty big deal. And I sort of see, and correct me if I'm wrong, that, WVD is a huge part of the future of Microsoft, right? So I think I think you sell yourself a bit short, my friend.
So I think, let's see how it pans out in terms of WVD. But everything that I'm seeing, both from the engineering side and from the customer side, is so promising for Windows Virtual Desktop. And I think as well it's going to be big. It's already big. I mean, it's only been out just over 2 months, and to be honest, it's already big.
That's great. Well, let's dive into WVD. So I have a bunch of questions I want to ask you, and I've learned a lot about it, but I want to hear it from your mouth and learn even more. So let's talk about WVD. For those who are not, have been living under a rock, that have not, do not know what this thing is, can you give us sort of the overview of WVD?
Yeah, absolutely. So at the very top level, it's Microsoft's own desktop as a service delivered from Azure. And it's got a number of parts to this. One is it's the only way to deliver Windows 10 multi-session, which is the only ever client multi-session OS that Microsoft's ever produced. It brings together a whole lot of optimizations for Office 365 Pro Plus as well. Not just the acquisition of FSLogix, but there's a whole raft of other features coming down into the product. It's a rich set of APIs, so it can be a platform for our partners to use and to scale on top of. And essentially it's a set of entitlements, right? It's the ability to use these Windows 10 multi-session, FSLogix, and many other features as part of probably an existing license, which is any Windows subscription license. So Windows 10 Enterprise or M365 V3 and above, that sort of thing. So yeah, it's super exciting.
That is cool. You mentioned Windows 10 multi-user, and this is very interesting. There was a lot of hype about this and talk about this prior to it being released. Can you tell us what this is and how is this different than, running on top of server?
Yeah, so traditionally we've everybody knows this. We've had two ways to do this. So you had a Windows 10 client OS, which you could connect to as a single session. And then if you wanted to do multiple sessions simultaneously to a VM and get the resource benefits and the cost benefits of that, then that had to be a server OS. And we've been doing this on-prem for 20 years.
Yeah.
And that fact that it was a server OS pretending to be a client OS has always caused us problems in the past. Whether it's supportability of apps. You phone somebody up and they say, What OS are you running on in this? Well, Windows Server. We don't support that. Or even that the application itself is prevented from installing on a server OS, right? It says we're not going to install on this. And other sort of compatibility stuff. The fact that you couldn't get like modern apps on a server OS. That sort of thing has always been an issue, and you have to skin it like Windows 7 or Windows 10. Wouldn't it be just so much easier if we could get that sort of cost benefit of the multi-session, but without all the problems that Server OS brought to the party? And that's essentially what it is. It's Windows 10 multi-session.
Yeah, very cool. And that's not available. That's only available through WVD, correct?
It's only available through WVD and only available on Azure.
Perfect. You also mentioned Office 365 integration. Can you talk more about that?
Absolutely. Now then, as you know, as I said in the intro, I came across to Microsoft through the FSLogix acquisition, and that set of products is still very close to my heart. And it's been amazing in the team for Windows Virtual Desktop have really made that FSLogix suite of applications first-class citizens. There was the Profile product and the Office 365 product. We'll just talk about those quickly together. They store your profile or your cache data for Office 365 in a disk on an SMB share somewhere. It means that these follow you around. There's no copying in and out of data. It's a great way to migrate settings, cache data, everything that user needs to be to have their desktop personalized around with them. And these are essential when you're looking at Office 365 Pro Plus, because as we all know, if you're in a non-persistent environment, every logon is the first logon. And if you've got gigs and gigs of cache data that you're bringing down from the cloud every single time you log on, or you're indexing all of your mailbox or your file system every single time you log on, then this is a big problem. And we managed to solve that by putting all of this in a disk on the network and attaching it at logon. So that's the FSLogix side for the Office 365 Pro Plus.
Very cool.
Now,
Go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah. But that's just the FSLogix side. If you look at what the Office team has been doing, so they've actually set up an engineering sub-team within Office specifically for making Office work as a first-class citizen on desktop virtualization. From simple things like syncing your inbox before your calendar when you first log on. Because if you've been in an organization 30 years and you've got a big old calendar, you don't want to be waiting several hours before you can first see your emails. You want to log on and be able to see your emails and your calendar comes down afterwards. And there's loads of other examples of improving the way that caching is done, per machine installers, and lots of nice to have quality of life stuff that is coming down from the Office team, specifically now that Microsoft's got its own desktop virtualization platform, and it's making the organization as a whole think about how to make this a better experience.
You got it. Oh, that's very cool. So you mentioned Azure. The WVD is an Azure, component. How is that different than traditional remote app? Terminal services, Citrix running on a server in Azure or in Amazon in the cloud, right? What's inherently different about that?
So for a user, it's not, right? You're either consuming an application or a desktop remotely. It's exactly the same for the user. The big difference is for the organization, both in architecture and in cost. The architecture, this is a platform as a service. If you're familiar with your on-prem environment where you've got load balancers, brokers, gateways, etc., and you're familiar with managing all of that, well, this is now behind a globally present, globally redundant service in Azure that is available in every single geo, of which there are 54 different locations around the world for Azure. So there's always going to be something local to you that you can put a virtual desktop inside. And all you're responsible for as the customer or the partner is what you should be responsible for. It's your image and your applications and how those are delivered to your users and where those are delivered to your users. Everything else is behind the Microsoft managed window, and you don't need to worry about it, which is great for standing up and configuring things and the simplicity. And then from the cost side, well, previously you had to think of what's your highest concurrency. You have that one day a year, which is, your high tide mark, and then you add, a safety margin of 10 or 20% on top of that. And then you say, well, we need to go and buy all this tin up front. Well, now you can either do, pay-as-you-go consumption model, or you can do reserved instances and pay 3 years in advance and get 60% off, or you can do any kind of combination of those two sort of pricing models as well to bring it down to and only pay for what you need.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, I love it. I love it. It's a true cloud offering, right? It's not just on-prem software installed in the cloud on someone else's server. No, it's a true cloud offering, and I think that's not mentioned enough, right?
So, yeah, and I always think of true cloud, right? So you need consumption pricing. You need a full set of rich APIs, and it needs to be a service rather than a whole load of VMs. And once you've got those, then you're well on your way to doing cloud properly, I would say.
You got it. You got it. You also mentioned images too, and that's one of the big things. Is people end up with a lot of images. Can you talk a bit about image management?
So there's a few topics here. So we've got actually creating the image itself. And then we've got how you deliver applications into that image and that ongoing management as well. So let's talk about creating an image. So you can use your existing on-prem tools. You can even use your existing on-prem images and just swap out the agent and upload it to Azure, and you can base your environment off your existing images. You can build them in the cloud. There's a new service that isn't quite GA yet called Azure Image Builder, which supports Windows 10 multi-session as a target, and you can automate the creation of the image using a cloud-native service in Azure, and then deploy it via something like Shared Image Gallery, which is another Azure service which will replicate your images all around the world to whatever destination you wish. And this is one of the reasons why Windows 10 multi-session is cloud only, because now we can see the richness that we're bringing in by integrating Windows Virtual Desktop with these other cloud services. And you'll see that happening more and more over the next few years as that integration gets richer and richer, and we're bringing more value to the customer by those kind of integrations.
You got it. You got it. You mentioned existing tools, and I also noticed that the launch of WVD, Microsoft showcased a bunch of its sort of launch partners, right? Is there a difference between those type of quote-unquote existing tools and the launch partners? Is there a new way to develop, a new integration? You mentioned APIs. What do you see there? What do we see moving forward, too?
So we got a lot of partners, particularly some ISVs who are treating Windows Virtual Desktop as a platform. And one of the two premier examples of that are Citrix and VMware. And this Windows Virtual Desktop is never intended to be competitive to Citrix or VMware. It is an offering that they can add value to the same way that this has worked for 20 years. We always had RDS, and then Citrix and VMware came and added value to that. This is exactly the same. It works in the cloud. We have Windows Virtual Desktop, and Citrix and VMware add value. And from day one, Citrix had support for Windows Virtual Desktop. They've been working with our engineers all the way through, and they've got their own Citrix Cloud, which can consume a lot of the cool WVD features that we've been talking about. And although VMware's offering isn't out just yet, that will be exactly the same and be able to consume these Windows Virtual Desktop features like Windows 10 multi-session, etc., etc.
Very cool. I like how you called it a platform. That's sort of how I see it too. Yesterday we installed on-prem, right? But we managed remotely. There's so many of my friends that are, admins or consultants that, manage servers all over the globe, right? They're not sitting there at the server, but tomorrow we'll do basically the same thing, but instead of installing on-prem, we'll install in Azure, right? We won't install in Azure. We'll just use that manage or that WVD desktop, right? And it just happens to be in Azure instead of someone's data center or, on a cloud server, right? Like you said, a bunch of VMs. That to me is the big difference. Yep. And everybody says, will we ever get Windows 10 multi-session on-prem? And the answer is probably not because of this integration we're talking about. There is a private preview of Windows 10 multi-session on Azure Stack that we're currently running.
So hopefully that will satisfy that need of some people to run Windows 10 multi-session on-prem by allowing Azure Stack to consume WVD and then extending the cloud into people's data centers.
I'm so glad you brought up Azure Stack, because when I saw that release, I was like, no, that's cool, because I think the world's going to be a hybrid world, right? Not everyone's going to be able to immediately move to, full-fledged desktop as a service, cloud delivered. They're going to have to, that hybrid's going to be there for a while, right? And Azure Stack gives us a lot of flexibility. Can you talk about that for people who might not know what Azure Stack is and of course, what WVD within Azure Stack means?
Yeah. Well, let's talk about why this might be useful. So, as you say, this is going to be a hybrid world. And, for the next 10 or 20 years, people are still going to have, client-server applications that are totally latency sensitive, where that data is sitting in your data center and you can't move that client up into a desktop in the cloud because, that application won't take 30 milliseconds round-trip latency. It will just, react horribly to that. And the companies aren't going to look at that and go, I just to satisfy this requirement, I'm going to refactor my entire application stack. No, they're going to wait that decade for that application to get sunsetted. So how do we cope with that? Well, we do what we've been doing for a long time, which we'll do a double hop. So now you can, and people have trouble sometimes thinking about this. So, okay, so I'm publishing an application from my own data center into a desktop that's sitting in the cloud? Yeah, well, it's no different than, publishing an application where your database is in New York and your desktop is in London because that's nearest to the user. It's the exact same thing we're doing with the cloud and with these old legacy latency sensitive applications. So now you realize that need is there. Then, okay, so how do I get a single pane of glass? And you can either go to the Citrix Systems, the VMwares of this world, or you can say, right, well, I'm going to consume Windows 10 multi-session on Azure Stack, which is a rack of gear that is paid where you can run Azure workloads in your data center and run Windows 10 multi-session on-prem that way. Even though I've just spent 5 minutes talking about it, I have to say this is not a promise of future delivery. And we are just in private preview at the moment. But that's why we're thinking about it.
Okay. Yeah, it makes like I said, it makes a lot of sense to me. So I think that's pretty neat stuff. And will help people migrate there too, right?
Yeah, hopefully.
Yeah. So, there's a lot of hype around WVD, and we definitely have to address that. Every marketing guy under the sun is talking about how WVD is the end-all be-all. Do you think the hype matches, what's being delivered? I definitely believe it matches what's going to be there in the future. Can you talk a bit about that?
So I think the hype is that Microsoft is finally delivering or getting serious about desktop virtualization.
Yeah.
And that hype is absolutely true because Microsoft is super serious about getting this right. I don't see a lot of hype around specific, features or roadmap items. It's more about, okay, it's Microsoft that's doing this.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not going to be possible that one of Microsoft partners are going to do something, and then Microsoft, well, actually, we're not going to allow this or do something. When the underlying platform is getting serious about it, that this technology, that this area of the industry is going to be around to stay for a good long time. So I think that's why people are excited more than anything else. Now, the future roadmap for WVD is super interesting because we're not sitting around here saying, all right, well, let's look at what features our partners are offering and do Me Too stuff. We're looking to innovate and do brand new things that haven't been seen in the industry before. And, I can't really, because this is a public forum, Doug, yeah. I can't really go into a lot of detail in terms of what those roadmap items are. But, yeah, if you think of, the 200 and odd services that Azure gives you access to, And then, these are the building blocks, these are jigsaw pieces that we can pick up and put together as we wish to enhance Windows Virtual Desktop as a service. And that's what we're going to be doing in the future.
I think that's great, because I think that's where Microsoft's always, that's sort of where they made their monopoly, so to speak, right? It was always about partnering. It was always about leaving room for the ecosystem to innovate, to create new technologies and take the entire industry forward, right? And I love that Microsoft's doing that with WVD and with Azure. I think it's just absolutely fabulous.
Yeah, and we've got so many cool partners queuing up to help us make Windows Virtual Desktop a really rich experience for all our customers. From companies like Printer Logic or Nideo or Cloud Jumper or ControlUp. There's so many cool vendors who are seeing value in jumping onto Windows Virtual Desktop. And the reason that they're doing this is because they've got customers saying, I want to take advantage of this. I want you to be a part of this ecosystem. I want you to be working with Microsoft to make sure that when we do move to the cloud, that the tools that we love are going to come with us as well.
You got it. Well, you mentioned, these cool partners. I have to bring up Agile too, right? I mean, I'd be remiss. I think it's amazing what Microsoft's doing around Linux and in mentioning Agile and bringing us up on stage at Ignite. Can you talk a bit about that relationship as much as you possibly can, and where you see the value of a solution like an Agile fit into WVD?
So we've got some great hardware partners, Agile being one of them. And Agile have been working really closely with Microsoft on building that Linux SDK, which we're going to be providing out to all our hardware partners, and that they can build on. Agile have done some great work, and they've done some early work with Microsoft, and that means that they've got first to market. So congrats to you guys on doing a great job there.
Can I ask your personal opinion on that? Is that possible as a Microsoft employee?
It's not really possible. I'll tell you what, you have to buy me a beer when we're in Nashville.
Fair enough. I totally understand. So I'm the Agile guy, right? So, you have to ask those questions. So
absolutely.
So, what type of customer would be, should be looking at WVD today? I think everyone should be looking at it, right? But what type of customer fits today?
So, whatever we had as an idea of the type of customer before we launched the product has been completely blown out the water by who we see using the service, and it's everybody. So we've got numbers of companies on WVD that runs into 5 figures, and that's not number of users, that's number of companies. And we see this from all across the different verticals, whether it's super large finance companies to 10 or 20 user sort of SMB sort of companies, and everything in between. So it's actually been a real surprise to us, looking at that telemetry, looking at the customers that are signed up, and see how broad the reach is for this product and for this service. So yeah, we got totally surprised and amazed by that.
That's great. I mean, I couldn't be happier with what Microsoft is doing around it. Guys like you and I jumped on this bandwagon called remoting back in the 90s, right? We thought it was a better way to compute. I still believe it's a better way to compute. And it's so amazing to see Microsoft have this as sort of a mainstream solution, if I can be so bold to say that. And like you said, taking this very seriously. And I just couldn't be happier. It's sort of like they proved us right in many ways, right?
That's it. We can just sit back on our laurels and say, you know what, we were the guys who were right all along.
Exactly, because I did get some grief from those Novell guys that I worked with way back when. Remember them?
Yeah, I remember them.
I was a junior engineer in those days, and all the Novell guys, or all the consultants I worked with, were senior engineers, and I figured to myself, there's no way I'm going to get any good jobs. I'm going to be adding users to NDS or something. So I took this Microsoft route, and they all laughed at me. And then I was introduced to Citrix, and that was before terminal services and all that stuff. And then they really laughed at me. So whenever I see them, I buy the drinks. Although they're doing just fine.
Very kind of you, Doug.
Yeah, they're doing just fine, if not better than me. I'm divorced. Anyway, I had so many other questions for you, but we discussed a lot of these already, which is really great because these are the type of podcasts I like. Is when you get way ahead of yourself on the question list, because it's not about answering questions, going one by one, it's about having a good conversation. So. I wanted to ask you about the future WVD2. You sort of said, there's so much you can't talk about. Is there anything you can talk about relating to where you see WVD going in the future, or maybe where you would like to see it?
So there's a couple of things that maybe we can talk about. So there's a product called MSIX App Attach, which is just come out in public preview.
Yeah.
Now, this is a new way to deliver an application into an OS, and ties into that image management conversation we were having earlier.
Yeah.
And MSIX App Attach is honestly the coolest thing I've come across since WVD itself. And if you can imagine it, so this will be the workflow, right? You get a company, SAP or whatever, doesn't matter. They produce an application. They produce that instead of MSI, they produce it in MSIX. And then you as a desktop virtualization admin, you take that application, you stick it on a SMB share, you entitle the user to it, and it just appears in their session without being installed. Doesn't even require a logon. And you haven't had to sequence or package that application. You haven't had to install it. All you've had to do is download it and entitle it, and then it works. Now, this is the dream, right?
That was the dream of SoftTricity. That was the dream of AppB.
Yep. And the reason why it's MSIX only, so the MSIX is the new packaging format from Microsoft. This is the way that Microsoft has encouraged all users to produce their applications. And if you created your application in Visual Studio, there's already a button in there which says just open up your solution, click one button, and then you've got an MSIX instead of an MSI. And that packaging format is interesting because it's strongly defined. So that application is not going to do anything at all to your OS that isn't in that manifest for that package. So you can tell, all right, I'm going to put this registry key here, I'm going to put that file there, I'm going to create this directory. And because we know exactly what the application is going to do, and this is actually a joint engineering effort between the old FSLogix guys and the MSIX team. And you can use the FSLogix filter driver to then make that application appear, because you're redirecting all those registry keys and all of those file system items. And that means that without installing, that application looks like it's installed, and it's installed locally. And you can then give that application to thousands of users with only having it in one location in a file share. It's so exciting.
That is exciting. That's I remember being introduced to SoftTricity, and that was the goal. Of course, like anything, it takes a little bit of time to get there, right? And get rid of the hypervisor, so to speak. And that's awesome. Do you see all apps moving this direction? Would there be something that holds us back?
So I think that we're going to see all apps, obviously apart from web apps, right? These are all installed apps will move this way. And whether you're installing an application on a laptop that's offline half the time, or whether you're installing an application which is through App Attach is then becoming a dynamic layer that gets assigned to a user. In the back end, it will all be MSIX. And this is what people want, because they don't want a completely different format or package for deploying to, physical and virtual and cloud and on-prem. They want to have a single way of management wherever. It's not always possible, but wherever possible to do so. And MSX is the promise of getting to that stage.
I love it. I love it. Do you see, here's sort of an interesting question for you. Do you see less web apps in the future and more Windows apps due to this, maybe richer applications?
Probably not. I think so. A native application is always going to have the advantage in terms of access to underlying OS APIs.
You bet.
So as long as your application needs to consume those APIs or that hardware, then you're going to need a rich application. And people sort of think of web apps as just being a web page, but because now the browser is almost an OS, I think you almost have to start looking at browser apps as analogous to installed apps in terms of their resource consumption, in terms of the way that they need to be managed sometimes. Because I mean, you can even write in C# and have that run in your browser now. So
you bet. Yeah. Old DABCC was all C#. So absolutely, I totally understand. Jim, I think that's about anything. Well, I mean, we can talk forever, right? But one other thing, we mentioned Agile, and I know you guys are going to be. Microsoft is sponsoring Disrupt, which is Agile's big conference. We do it both in Munich and in Nashville in January and early February. And if you guys if you can attend, please do. It's one of the most amazing shows, and good old. I'll quote Brian Madden because he said one of the most amazing things. He came to Disrupt a couple years ago, and he said, I come to this conference and I think I'm going to be at the Ramada Inn, I think is how he described it, in, a back corner of the room, and it's going to be all lame and boring. But he walked away saying it was one of the best shows he's ever been to, which is a real compliment. And a couple years later, it's even bigger and better. And Jeders does not do things small, right? So you guys are going to be there. There's my pitch for Disrupt. I'm really excited about it myself. You guys are going to be there. Can you talk a bit about what you guys are going to do? You're going to be, I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, so it was great news when I heard that Microsoft were going to sponsor Disrupt, both in the US and in Europe. And just seeing a partnership that I'm really excited about, deepen in this way is great to see. So we got the program manager for WVD. So the guy in charge is somebody called Scott Manchester, who's going to come down. He's going to be on stage, giving an overview of WVD, giving that vision statement that really only he's qualified to give. And then I'm there with another colleague of mine, a guy called Christian Brinkhoff, which may be a name familiar to some of your audience. And together we're doing a masterclass on Windows Virtual Desktop, both in Nashville and in Munich. And there's a couple of other sessions going on as well. So yeah, it's great to see that Microsoft are going to have such a big presence at Agile's big show, and I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, I really am too. It's every year it gets bigger, every year it gets better, and it's the lineup for that show is quite impressive. We have you guys. We have Citrix there. Everyone's going to be there, and there's so much. It's just going to be a great time. The who's who is coming. I can't. I'm tickled. Right? It sort of leaves me speechless. So.
Well, I'm happy to give a plug to Disrupt because I was there yesterday. I had a really great time. Last year, and I had a really great time. So yeah, it's going to be great.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, Jim, thank you so much for taking the time to do this with me. We had you on the show, last year, maybe a couple years ago?
Maybe a couple of years ago, yeah.
Yeah, and that was a lot of fun. And then you sort of made the joke when I saw you, I don't know where we were, but about it, and I was like, hey, we should do that again. So I'm so glad that you took the time to do it, and we made this happen, and look forward to having you on in the future.
Thanks very much for the time, Doug, and I'm sure I'll see you soon.
Absolutely, and happy holidays, Merry Christmas, and a very happy and prosperous 2020 to you. I can't believe it's 2020. Gee, man, just it seems like last year I couldn't go do work because it was 1999, right?
Well, time moves faster as you get older, man. That's a truism.
Okay, my friend. You take care. Thank you so much.
Cheers, Doug. Bye.
Okie dokie. What do I say? First episode back. I feel like I've been doing this for a long time. Really great to talk with Jim, and I love the interview. I love WVD. I love what Microsoft is doing. I was a Microsoft boy. Well, to be honest with you, Microsoft's what got me into all this stuff. So actually, Alpha Microsystems did, and don't confuse that with the DEC Alpha. But my father did. But then I started telling him about this Bill Gates guy, and he kept screaming at me that I didn't know what I was talking about. Another person I get a laugh at nowadays. But and I do. Trust me, I do. But thank you so much, Jim, for taking the time to do this. And Happy New Year to each and every one of you guys listening. Definitely, if you like the show, tell a friend and let them know it's back, okay? If you guys want to do an interview, if you want to come on and talk about what you guys are doing around WVD, around VMware, around Citrix, around anything, and then some, please give me a call. Send me an email, dbrown@DABCC or brown@igel.com. Please come to Disrupt. Head over to igel.com and check out what's going on there. And it's amazing what Agile is doing. That's another company. I joined 3 years ago, and when I joined, a lot of my friends were like, "What are you doing going to Agile, a thin client company?" And we're one of the biggest, most successful, growingest companies in the EUC space today, and there's a reason for it. We have great software, absolutely great software, and we hear it every day from customers. And also, if you want to learn more about Agile, join the Agile community, www.agilecommunity.com. And we have almost 3,000 of some of the best EUC guys in the world, and some of the most passionate customers and partners I've ever witnessed. And I spent time at Citrix in the early days when there was a heck of a lot of passionate people and just people thinking and knowing that they were changing the world. And I think at Agile we're doing the same nowadays, and we're leading the way in a better way to compute from the endpoint and letting Microsoft do what they're doing from the cloud, and it's a perfect marriage. So definitely check out what we're doing with Agile. Check out the Agile community. Please join. We use Slack. It's a great place to be. And with no further ado, I'm just going to call this an episode. I'm going to thank everyone for listening. I'm going to wish you all very happy holidays and a very, very, very happy 2020. I can't believe it's 2020 already. Like Jim said, we're getting old, Doug. We're getting old. So on that note, thanks, everyone.
DABCC.
Say it again, DABCC.
DABCC.
Can you say it again, DABCC?
DABCC.
How about DABCC?
DABCC.
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 DABCC.